Imagine fulfilling the greatest dream of your life. Watching a Formula One race at one of the most legendary and historic circuits in the category. You see the best drivers in the world arrive, you feel the roar of the engines, and your excitement is at its peak. And not only that, but it's raining, which means only one thing. The show is guaranteed. Then the moment arrives, the race starts, and this happens.
Coulthard hits the wall. They're stopping the race. This is terrible. This is the worst start to a Grand Prix I've ever seen in my entire life.
And this was just the beginning of the most dramatic and chaotic race in Formula One history. The 1998 Belgian Grand Prix. A massive crash involving 13 cars, a fight in the pits, the Schumacher brothers going to war, the first victory for one of the sport's most humble teams, and many more moments that made what happened that day even more incredible. This Grand Prix had everything, but what made it so unforgettable wasn't just the chaos on the track, but what was at stake off the track? Because SPA wasn't just another race, it was the most tense moment of the season. Michael Schumacher and Mika Häkkinen battled for the championship only 7 points apart. Ferrari versus McLaren, 2 teams, 2 drivers, and 4 races to decide it all. No one expected this fight would be decided by neither talent nor strategy, but with one of the most controversial moments in the history of the sport. So stay until the end to find out everything that happened that day at the SPA Francorchamps circuit. The race in Belgium came just when both championships were tighter than ever. Mika Häkkinen led with 77 points and 6 wins. For his part, Schumacher was in second place with 70 points and 5 wins. Just a 7-point difference and 4 races ahead. On the Constructors' Championship side, McLaren was leading with 125 points, ahead of Ferrari with 102. And with such parity, every session mattered and every detail made a difference. That's why from the very first practice, McLaren went all out. Coulthard was the fastest in the first session with Häkkinen second, even though he had an accident at the end of it. Later in the second session, Schumacher set the fastest time. Right behind him were the 2 McLarens, Häkkinen second and Coulthard third. Additionally, during that session, Jacques Villeneuve was involved in one of the most dangerous moments of the weekend after losing control of his car at 290 km/h in Eau Rouge. It was a chilling accident, and although he was unharmed, it was a warning of what could happen during the weekend. In the third session, the McLarens were once again the fastest cars with a 1-2 led by Häkkinen, and at that point, everything pointed to Belgium being completely dominated by them. In that session, Mika Salo crashed at Eau Rouge and was hospitalized. And although after the respective checkups he was cleared to qualify, his problems were only just beginning. Then qualifying arrived and what was already expected was confirmed. Coulthard and Häkkinen took turns holding first place with each attempt. Each lap was faster than the previous one, but in the end, Häkkinen took his 9th pole of the season, just a 10th ahead of his teammate. McLaren once again secured the front row. However, the real surprise came from Damon Hill, who put his Jordan in 3rd place in what was his best qualifying of the year. For his part, Schumacher qualified 4th. Although this is where the first controversy of the weekend arose, since his fastest lap was canceled for not slowing down under a yellow flag. Even so, his next lap, which was faster, was enough for him to keep the position he already had. But this was his first warning of the weekend and a sign that things weren't going to be easy for Ferrari. Behind him was Eddie Irvine, his teammate at Ferrari, while Villeneuve completed the top 6, despite having wrecked his car the day before. Mika Salo, on the other hand, crashed again during qualifying. Another crash, another hit, and the worst was yet to come. So, everything was set for one of the most chaotic races ever seen in the history of the category. Race day ended up being total chaos from the very first minute, even though the forecast pointed to a dry Sunday. The rain arrived early in the morning, and it was more than a drizzle. It was a downpour. In the midst of the heavy rain, Michael Schumacher set the fastest time in the warm-up session. followed by Irvine, Hakkinen, Fisichella, Ralf Schumacher, and Damon Hill. Despite the complicated weather, the race was set to proceed as scheduled without a safety car. The weather was unpredictable, and with the track soaked, tire decisions were key. Villeneuve, Alesi, and Schumacher used intermediate tires. Others, like Hakkinen, Coulthard, Hill, and Irvine, chose extreme wet tires. They wanted to play it safe, but that race ended up being anything but safe.
Yes, let's go!
When the lights went out, Hakkinen had a good start, but Coulthard, on the other hand, spun his wheels and fell behind. For his part, Hill lost traction and dropped from 3rd place to 7th. The cars at the front got off relatively well, but it was further back where the real chaos broke out. Visibility was practically zero due to the spray covering the track. And in the middle of that curtain of water, Coulthard lost control. He ran over a metal grate, the car aquaplaned, and went straight into the wall right before the climb to Eau Rouge. He bounced, spun, and crossed the track in the opposite direction. This caused a massive accident and a chilling scene.
Great start by Eddie Irvine, Villeneuve into the wall. Who is that? Coulthard into the wall. David Coulthard is in the wall, stopping the race. This is terrible. This is the worst start to a Grand Prix I have ever seen in my entire life.
One of the worst accidents ever seen in the history of Formula One. When watching the replay, you can see that a first tire came off and hit Coulthard, but not very hard. Then another one went towards where the Scotsman was. This second one flew off much more violently and was close to hitting Coulthard. If it had fallen onto the stands, fortunately, it didn't hit the driver or the crowd. The accident lasted barely 15 seconds, but in that time, 13 cars were completely destroyed, and it's estimated that the crash cost nearly $13 million in damages. Among those involved were Eddie Irvine, Alexander Wurz, Jos Verstappen, Rubens Barrichello, Johnny Herbert, Olivier Panis, Jarno Trulli, Mika Salo, Pedro Diniz, Toranosuke Takagi, Ricardo Rosset, Shinji Nakano, and David Coulthard. The race was immediately stopped with a red flag before the end of the first lap. There were cars everywhere, the track was still soaked, and visibility was practically zero. Irvine and Barrichello had minor injuries. Irvine restarted, Barrichello couldn't. Additionally, 3 teams lost both cars in that crash, but since they only had one spare car, Salo, Rosset, and Panis had to retire so their teammates could continue. In total, 4 drivers couldn't get back on track. And although it's hard to believe, none of them were seriously injured in the crash. So the track marshals started cleaning up the mess to prepare for the new start. It took almost an hour to clear the debris, remove the wrecked cars, and prepare the spare cars for the restart. And when they lined up on the grid again, only 18 cars were ready to restart. The only one involved in the initial accident who managed to escape unscathed was Ralf Schumacher, who had positioned his car well to avoid the disaster. The second start was completely different. Damon Hill, who had a bad start before the accident, did it perfectly this time and overtook both McLarens before reaching the first corner. And while Hill was living a dream, Hakkinen was facing a nightmare. The Finn lost control of his car coming out of the first corner after a slight contact with Schumacher, his direct rival for the championship. The McLaren spun completely and ended up stopped, facing the wrong direction. Right after that, before he could react, he was hit by Johnny Herbert and both were instantly out of the race. Hakkinen, the championship leader, was eliminated on the first lap after the restart. And since the McLaren was left right in the middle of the track, the safety car had to come out immediately. But that wasn't all. Things kept getting worse for McLaren because Coulthard also had a terrible first lap.
And there goes Coulthard. Coulthard goes off in one of the Benettons as well. This is terrible for the McLaren team.
He collided with Alexander Wurz's Benetton and ended up in the gravel trap. Although he rejoined the race, he returned in last place. Wurz, on the other hand, couldn't continue. And yes, all of this happened in a single lap. After all the chaos, while the safety car was leading the group, the top 10 was as follows: Hill, Michael Schumacher, Irvine, Alesi, Villeneuve, Frentzen, Ralf Schumacher, Fisichella, Diniz, Verstappen. Damon Hill, surprisingly, was leading the race, but the most striking thing was what was coming behind him. The two Ferraris in second and third place, because with Hakkinen out of the race and Coulthard in last position, Ferrari had a golden opportunity to close the gap in the championship and deliver a key blow in the fight for the title. However, everything was about to change again. After Herbert Sauber and Hakkinen's McLaren were retired, the race resumed just 2 laps later. Hill's Jordan, which had opted for intermediate tires, seemed comfortable in the changing conditions, and during the first laps, he managed to stay ahead of Schumacher's Ferrari, with a slight but steady advantage just over a second. But the rain intensified again and the Jordan began to struggle. It became clear that it wasn't prepared for those conditions. And on lap 7, Schumacher attacked.
On the inside at the bus stop, he has the position on the track. Squeezes Damon a bit. Michael Schumacher with a textbook overtake.
He braked later than Hill at the bus stop chicane and took the lead. Simple and effective. Schumacher was by far the fastest on the track, and he handled the rain with total confidence. It seemed only a matter of time before he won. And with Hakkinen out, he had an unmatched opportunity in his hands to surpass the Finn in the fight for the Drivers' Championship. Meanwhile, the race kept eliminating cars one by one. On lap 8, Jos Verstappen had to retire due to an engine failure. A lap later, Irvine had problems.
It's Irvine! It's Irvine! Sorry, he's overexerting himself.
He went off at a chicane, hit a curb, and broke his front wing, so he had to pit for repairs. Irvine dropped from 3rd to 11th place and took the opportunity to switch to extreme wet tires. Ralf Schumacher, very strategically, pitted on lap 11 to put on full wets. A smart decision that would pay off for him later. Then, on lap 16, the leaders who were still on intermediates, Jacques Villeneuve, also started coming into the pits. Or at least they tried.
He goes off! Jacques Villeneuve!
Villeneuve went straight into the barriers just before his pit stop and was out of the race. By lap 17, Michael Schumacher was comfortably leading, with Hill in second and Ralf in third, the latter benefiting from having changed tires before the others. Alesi, Frentzen, Irvine, Diniz, and Fisichella completed the top positions. Coulthard was still struggling, uncomfortable with the track, and even requested the safety car return. A request that seemed exaggerated at the time, but in the end, he was proven right. On that same lap, Esteban Tuero also had to retire due to a gearbox problem with his Minardi. Given all that happened, a Schumacher victory seemed certain. He was alone at the front, controlling the pace and with no real threats. However, no one could have imagined what was about to happen. But before I tell you, if you're enjoying this video, subscribe. On lap 24, Michael Schumacher was almost 30 seconds ahead of Damon Hill. Meanwhile, his brother Ralf had reduced the gap with Hill to just 10 seconds. As I said, everything seemed set for an easy victory for the elder Schumacher. But on that same lap, the German had his first brush with danger. Diniz was coming out of the pits just as Michael was going down the straight, and they almost ended up crashing. But this time, they saw each other in time. But with that level of rain, anything could happen, and then came lap 25. With more than 40 seconds ahead of Hill, Schumacher came across David Coulthard, who was about to be lapped. The McLaren was more than 2 minutes behind the Ferrari, but it wouldn't move aside despite the blue flags. Schumacher began gesturing, clearly impatient and frustrated. Jean Todt, Ferrari's team principal, had already gone to the McLaren pit wall to make sure Coulthard would let him through. But the Scotsman, Hakkinen's teammate, wasn't cooperating with the German at all. Coulthard stayed on the racing line while Schumacher, blinded by rain, followed closely behind. Suddenly, Coulthard lifted his foot off the accelerator and then it happened.
Oh God! Michael Schumacher crashes into David Coulthard and is out of the Belgian Grand Prix.
On the straight at over 200 kilometers per hour in the rain, Schumacher didn't have time to react and crashed right into him. The Ferrari hit the rear of the McLaren, lost a wheel, and the front suspension was completely destroyed. Meanwhile, the rear wing of the McLaren also flew off. Both cars managed to return to the pits, but for Schumacher, the race was over. He was in first place with more than 30 seconds of advantage, had a crushing pace, and was about to take the championship lead from Hakkinen, but he lost it all in a crash with his main rival's teammate. He was so furious that when he got to the pits, he threw the steering wheel at his mechanic, got out of the car, and went straight to the McLaren garage. Meanwhile, Coulthard also arrived at the pits, and that's where Schumacher, completely out of control, met him. He confronted Coulthard, trying to start a fight. He was totally convinced that the Scotsman was to blame for what had just happened. According to what Coulthard said later, Michael accused him by saying, "You tried to kill me." The situation became so tense that the Ferrari and McLaren staff had to step in to physically separate them. After that, Schumacher went straight to the steward's office to file a formal protest against Coulthard. Later, the Scotsman made the following statement about the German's behavior. "It's disgusting behavior for someone with such a fantastic record in this sport. He really needs help controlling his anger." As if that wasn't enough, with all that had happened on that lap, Irvine spun out and retired from the race. In less than a lap, Ferrari went from having everything to having nothing. They had missed an unbeatable opportunity to close the gap with McLaren, especially Schumacher, who lost the chance to overtake Hakkinen in the Drivers' Championship. And the fact that the incident was with Coulthard, his rival's teammate at McLaren, made everything even more controversial. With 19 laps to go, a totally unexpected scenario unfolded. Damon Hill was once again in the lead with his Jordan, and Ralph, who had been third before his brother's problem, kept closing the gap to the Briton, having managed to reduce the difference from 22 seconds to just over 10. Just one lap later, on lap 26, another accident again changed the race's course. Fisichella collided with Shinji Nakano's Minardi in an accident similar to the Schumacher-Coulthard crash. Nakano slowed for the chicane, but Fisichella, unable to see him in the rain, rear-ended him. After the contact, the Benetton grazed the pit wall and caught fire when it stopped. Although the fire was quickly controlled, both drivers were unharmed and the safety car came out again. Hill took advantage of the moment to make his second pit stop and managed to stay in the lead. At that moment, only 6 cars were still on track, which meant that all of them were in a position to score points. That's why David Coulthard, who was greeted with boos, and Shinji Nakano returned to the track after repairs, hoping to get at least 1 point if someone dropped out. Thanks to the safety car, Ralf Schumacher was right behind Hill for the restart, and although he seemed to have a real chance to win, he was about to get a terrible surprise. When the safety car pulled in with 12 laps to go, Jordan saw something possible, something he had never been so close to before. Not just a victory, but also a 1-2 finish. For the first time in its history, the team had both of its cars at the front in a race. Ralf Schumacher found his rhythm right after the restart and began to put pressure on Hill. The heavy rain kept pouring, and in the first corner, both nearly lost control of the car. Amid the tension, Hill sent a radio message that sparked a new controversy in the race.
"I'm going to put something here for you, and I think you'd better listen to this.
If we both run,
We could end up with nothing.
It depends on Eddie, Jody.
If we don't compete,
we can take first and second place. It's up to you."
He wasn't asking for direct protection, but he made it clear what he wanted: to secure his victory. Jordan took a while to react because they were considering all the factors, and one in particular weighed more than the rest. Ralph's contract negotiations for the next season finally made them step in and give team orders. Sam Michael, Ralph's engineer, told him not to attack Hill, a message that the German was not happy with at all.
Ralph, don't pass Damon. That's a team order.
Despite the clear instructions, Schumacher kept pushing.
You heard me before, Ralph, about overtaking Damon, right?
Still, there was no response.
Do you understand, Ralph? Did you hear me?
Nothing, just silence.
Ralph's answer.
After the 4th attempt, he finally got Ralph to answer, but his response was dry and without any real commitment. Just 2 words.
Yes, Sam.
Even so, the German stayed close. He didn't attack, but he didn't fall behind either. Alesi from behind was starting to get closer to Schumacher, trying to put pressure on him, but he didn't have the pace to get into the fight. Finally, the race ended on lap 44, and Damon Hill achieved a legendary victory.
He wins in Belgium. Fantastic.
It was the first victory in Jordan's history and also the last in the Briton's career, a 1-2. historic for the team. And when they crossed the finish line, Eddie Jordan's joy knew no bounds. At that moment, his famous paddock dance began. And while it looked like a celebration, not everything was joyful. And the last scandal of the weekend was about to erupt. If you've made it this far, you're likely enjoying the video, so subscribe. Ralph's frustration was clear, just like his brother's earlier fury in the McLaren garage. He almost achieved his first Formula One win, but it was taken from him. Even though he made the podium, waved his cap, and sprayed champagne, his annoyance was clear, but the one who was even angrier was his brother. When it was revealed Eddie Jordan ordered the team to hold back Ralph, Michael went directly to the team's motorhome during the celebrations and confronted him. He told him his brother would never ride in his cars again, and he kept his word. He paid $2 million to end his brother's contract with Jordan. And after the next race in Monza, it was announced that Ralf Schumacher had signed with Williams. Michael, for his part, lost the chance to win his third world title. In the last race of the year in Suzuka, Hakkinen was crowned champion. And although winning at SPA wouldn't have secured him the title, it would have given the German a 6-point lead instead of a 4-point deficit going into Japan. In the end, only 8 out of 22 cars managed to finish the race, and of the 14 retirements, 13 were due to collisions or resulting damage. SPA 1998 was one of the most chaotic and dramatic races ever seen in the history of Formula One. But even so, it wouldn't even compare to what happened in Indianapolis in 2005. So much so that that day was marked as the most embarrassing in the history of the sport. So watch this video and find out what happened at the 2005 United States Grand Prix, which is considered the greatest humiliation Formula One has ever experienced.